right, here we go. Okay, get rid of the echo. Hi, I am Dr. Jacob Larson. This is Read, Write, and Cite, the channel where I teach you how to read, write, and cite for your college classes. In this video, I'm going to go in depth to explain what you can expect to see as you read different kinds of research projects, right? So this is going to help you to understand the kind of paper maybe that you're trying to write, but more specifically for this paper, as you are reading and conducting research, you're looking at what other people have done. You're going to understand what kind of study it is, what the different parts and sections of the paper are, so that you can understand them. This will also then later inform how you write your own papers. Obviously, one thing that we need to understand, when you are conducting your own research, there's a lot of steps, there's a lot of things that in some cases have to be approved, and it's not something you just start doing, right? There's guidance along the way. You'll learn about different research methods. That's not what we're talking about in this video, this podcast today. Today, we're just talking about the different parts of a research paper. I'm going to kind of explain them, and this can hopefully help you understand the big picture for how everything works. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so let's talk about essays first. If you are in your early college experience, by the time that you're doing research in college, you've probably had a class or two about writing essays. This is probably what you focused on doing throughout high school, depending on wherever you are in the world, what your secondary experience was. But this is a pretty good structure that you might have expected to learn writing an essay. You start with some sort of introduction where you're going to introduce the topic, and then you're going to state a thesis. Your thesis is that main claim, the thing that the paper is trying to prove or support or explain. This theoretically should be debatable, or else if you're just trying to explain facts without any clear point, then your paper is going to seem like, yeah, what's the point, right? What are you trying to accomplish? Because you're not trying to say anything. You're just repeating other things that have been said. Anyway, that's why we state a thesis. The body of the paper, which is going to be the majority of the text, it's going to make claims. You're going to support these claims with evidence. You are, if you're going in depth, and I hope that you would then be maybe responding to opposing viewpoints, to the ideas that other people say, that they may disagree with your perspective. You respond to that. You come out pretty strong. Hopefully you're avoiding logical fallacies, so you're not making mistakes and whatever. When you get to the end, you're going to state your thesis again, which hopefully has been really clear throughout this whole process. You summarize your claims, your evidence, and then you're done. You're out. At the school that I teach at, this is what we would cover in our 101 class. What I'm talking about today would follow up in the 102 class, the next course that you take after this. That's when we start getting into the research. Oh, looks like I hit my stand goal somehow. Not sure how that happened. Okay, so let's talk about how research is different. Research, unlike an essay, has a completely different purpose. It may use similar structures, but it's not trying to do the same thing. In an essay, you have an agenda. You're trying to change how your audience thinks, feels, believes. You may even try to get them to do something, right? Vote for this candidate, buy this product, agree with me on this topic. Research is not trying to do that. And in fact, it's not a good idea if it does, because research should be as unbiased as possible. No, we don't live in a perfect world. Everyone has opinions, and we push our opinions forward. We have agendas, but hopefully that doesn't show up in our research, because we need to be able to trust the research. If the author for research has an agenda and it's clear in the writing, it makes it hard to believe whether they haven't changed the numbers. They haven't overlooked something, because it's clear that they've landed on some side of an issue. And for us to trust it, it's best if they conduct the study, they present what the study found, and maybe they make a suggestion for what they think it means, but that's different than trying to persuade us. Okay, this research says this, now go do this. That is the realm of an essay. That's the realm of journalism. That's a different area altogether than research. Research, preferably, it is unbiased. It conducts an experiment. It does a review of what research says. It presents what it finds, and then it makes suggestions, but it doesn't tell you, you should think this, you should do this, you should feel this way. It has a very different goal in mind. Does that make sense? Okay, research is not the same as persuasive writing. If you're being taught that, I would be very leery, because it's going to go in the wrong direction. Okay, that being said, you're going to find two major types, and you can disagree with me, and that's fine. Two major types of research papers as you start to conduct. You're going onto online databases. You're looking for research. This is not looking at a blog, a news site. This is looking for papers that people who conducted research wrote. When I say research, that's what I'm talking about for our context today. All right. You're going to find two major categories. One, original research. Now, I use this term. This could apply to all of it in general, but I'm making two categories. So here's my distinction. Original research, the way I'm using that term today, the authors, they've conducted an experiment. They did something to collect new information, right? So what the paper will do, it's going to present the findings of the research that they conducted themselves. They're not reporting on what someone else did. They're presenting their own research. As part of that, they're going to explain the method, how they went about doing it, the process they took, and what they found. We do this in research. Think of it as the equivalent of showing your work in like a math problem, right? We do this in research because then someone else can duplicate the study. They can go out and say, okay, well, that's what happened when you did it. I'm going to try and do the same thing. So if you follow the same steps, if they did everything right, and depending on who's involved with the study, you should have a similar outcome. That's kind of the grand vision and purpose and scheme of the scientific method. That if you're methodical in your process, you're deliberate in how you do something, it can be replicated. Does that make sense? With at least similar results. Okay, that's why in original research, much of the paper is explaining how they did it, what information they collected, and what they think it means. That's not the same as, you should do this, you should think this way, you should feel this way. That's what an essay would do. Original research doesn't do that, because they want you to trust the information, and that's harder if you can't trust the author. All right, I'm also going to say that there is another kind of study which you could argue is still original, but you're not conducting an experiment. You're not collecting new data. What you are is you're looking at what others have reported, and you're taking findings from that because you're looking at a bunch of studies, right? We call this a literature review. That term is going to come up again, and we're going to use it in more than one way. But this kind of paper, it presents findings on a collection of research on a topic from many authors. And it's going to explain how the body of research, how all the different sources, when you look at them together, what they say about the subject when it's been analyzed to draw new conclusions. Okay, so in this case, the researcher, the author of a literature review, they're their study is to look at what other people have written. And they bring a bunch of information together, and then they say, all right, if I look at all this, what new information can I gather from it? And that's a different kind of study. We're not getting too specific in different design methods today, but I'm just going to separate things into two major categories. Okay, so as you start to look at research, you can find a study where someone did something new and they collected their own data, or you can find studies where they looked at what other people had did and then they collected information from that. Okay? Then they present them. Both are research. All right? Hope that this makes sense so far. So let's explain each of these kind of broad categories that I've created, what they're going to look like, and then we're going to look at some examples. Okay, so if you want to understand the general parts for a paper that is presenting original research, here are some of the sections you can expect to find. Now, not every study is going to have the exact same sections, but they're going to follow a pattern similar to this. Okay, so you're going to have some sort of introduction. Your introduction is going to introduce the topic, just like you would expect in an essay, and you're trying to establish why the research was conducted. You're explaining whatever the issue, whatever the topic, whatever the situation is that merits research, and maybe you're kind of justifying why you did the research that you did. Okay, part of this you could expect to see some research questions, which are the question that the author hopes to answer by conducting the study. They may have more than one, and if they do, there's going to be some way that they're trying to measure that specific thing. Okay? All right, so in your introduction, and research questions, they could show up in a different section, but they're going to show up early because you want to know from the very beginning what the authors of the study were trying to do, what questions they were trying to answer. Because if you go to the end, you're going to see how they think that was answered or not. Okay? All right, following this, you're going to get pretty early in the paper, you're going to get a literature review. Well, this sounds confusing. Isn't that a different kind of paper? Yes, but it's going to do the same thing. You're going to have a literature review section inside of the paper, which does something very similar. Before they went out and they conducted new research, they looked at what had already been done. And so they're going to kind of report objectively what other people had already done. So you're going to look at the different kind of parts and pieces, maybe different kinds of studies that were conducted, what they found, things, information on the topic you're looking at, or maybe the population, the group of people that you're studying. You kind of get a broad scope of what's already out there, which informed how you chose to get more information, right? Again, the whole point of showing your work is so other people can double check it. And if they want to replicate the study, if they want to do it again themselves, they could do that because you showed exactly how you did it. You even explained why you did it the way that you did through sections like the literature review. Following that, you're going to have some sort of section where you're going to explain how you conducted the study. This is going to include things like your design and your methodology. Now, design is, there's different ways to collect information, right? If I want to see what people think about a certain subject, I could just go ask them. But I have to be specific and deliberate in how I do that, or else I don't know that the information I'm collecting is valid, that it's reliable, that I can trust what I'm about to get. And so there are established designs and methods for going to collect information. You're going to see three major types of data collection. You're going to see quantitative. That's where you're looking at really specific numbers, and you're going to be dealing with a lot of statistic work, right? This is hard data collection. You also can see qualitative, which is more like you're going to be surveying and asking people questions, and then you look at what people have said and you pull information out of that through maybe like an interview or a survey or some sort of observation, and then you're going to turn that into information, data. Or you could do a mixture of the two, where you are collecting hard data and you're making, you're interviewing people and whatever, you're asking what they think about a subject. We call that mixed methods. When you are looking at research design and methodology, they're going to say what kind of study it is and how they went about collecting information. So you might see terms like this was a quasi-experimental study, it was quantitative or qualitative or whatever. You're going to hear some of these terms, and they're going to show up early in the paper, and they're going to tell you the kind of research they conducted, how they went about getting information. And if you're familiar with research methods, then this is really useful because you know what kind of information you're going to see. They're also going to talk about who they surveyed, what group they investigated, and how they got that information. If they created their own data collection device, they're going to call it something like an instrument. They're going to explain how they made sure that that was valid. If they used someone else's instrument, they went and picked someone else's survey and then they used it for themselves, they're going to explain that. This is why this section is important, because they're explaining how they collected information and why you can trust it. Okay? Yeah, we're getting nerdy and in the thick of things already, so this is good. But if you're looking at research and you don't understand these topics, it's not really helpful. Okay, so after this, they will have gone and conducted their experiment, and they're going to start presenting what they found. There's going to be data analysis. They're going to show charts and graphs, and they're going to show their work, right? They're going to give information. And it's probably going to be in some sort of abbreviated form that's easy to show up in a paper as opposed to, a huge data bank or something like that. Okay? This section can show up in a bunch of different names. For this video, I'm calling this findings, because this is where they're going to explain, all right, this is what we found. We did the study. This is what we found. This can be really useful because this is where you can draw statistics from, right? You can look at the actual study, and even though they're going to explain what they think the numbers mean, you can also pull statistics out of this. Because statistic is, in short, a statistic is you take information and then you start to interpret it. This is what this information means. That's when it becomes a statistic. It's not just the data itself. Okay? So that's something you can do by looking at their original research. You can also look at what they thought that it meant. And so there may be some sort of discussion. They may use this term, they may use a different term, where they explain what they think the data means. All right, so we did this study, we looked at the information, this is what we think it means, right? And then you're going to get to some sort of conclusion, some sort of as a final section. This is where they might put their, they might show more their opinion at this point. They're not going to be persuasive in saying that this is how you should think, feel, believe, or act, but they're going to say, all right, we showed our work, we did this whole thing, this is what we found, this is what we think it means, this is what we think should happen next. Now, that's not the same as saying, no, go out and do it. You have to do this or the world will, suffer. But this is where someone who's conducted an experiment, projects to other researchers, okay, this is what we found. We think that here's a next step to investigate this question. This is, we should do this kind of study next, or we should do this again, or we should try with a different group or a different place. That's what might show up in this sort of part of a paper. If they've gone through this entire process, they've gone through a very logical process. They explain what a situation. They explain what their question was. They're going to say, well, we looked into it, and this is what other people thought. And we were very careful. This is the method, the design, the process that we took to look into this. This is what we found. This is what we think it means. So that's where they explain how they answered their own question, what they found. And it doesn't always end the way that they expect it does. Research doesn't always happen that way. And then they explain, all right, so this is what we found. We were surprised. We didn't expect that, or that's exactly what we expected. And this is what we think should happen next, right? You're going to notice that the language that a researcher uses in this kind of paper is also going to be very careful. They're not going to exaggerate because, again, we're trying to avoid bias. We don't want to overstate. And when they explain the statistics, they're also going to be very careful with what they're not going to say this proves this. They may use terms like this suggests this. Because proving causation is really hard because you have to completely control all variables in a situation. And especially if you're working with people, that's almost impossible. So a fair, balanced research project is going to use very careful language, like this suggests this. It's not going to say, and so we proved this. So if you're writing that kind of paper, you got to be really, really careful too, because if you overstate something, you're making a logical fallacy, and you probably don't understand your own data, right? So you got to be really careful. Okay, so this is what I'm calling original research. Lots of different kinds of studies fit into this category. You also have literature reviews. They're going to be similar. They may even use similar methods, but they're not. They're using other people's research as their basis. Okay, so here's some kinds of sections that you might expect to see as well. An introduction, where you're going to introduce the topic. Maybe they even have a research question included here too. All right, so this was the situation. This is what we expected to find, and so we did this. You're going to get some sort of research design methodology section where they explain how they chose the sources that they were going to look at. And so maybe they look at, 40 different papers, or they look at 100 papers or whatever, right? They're going to explain how they chose what they were going to do and what they didn't do, right? That's the kind of thing that shows up in this section, because a literature review, again, we're trying to create synthesis and look at what our data set is, what other people have already published. Okay? All right. And so you're going to get into different sections of a paper that maybe they break it down by category. All right, these 10 papers, they're kind of on this topic, and they might summarize and synthesize that. Then they might take a different section, then a different section. They're going to have findings as well. They're going to explain what they think, all the data means, and they may even say, this is what we think should happen next. So it's going to be similar to what we saw with what I called original research, probably a bad term, but what I called original research. But it's very different. The information, the data that they're working from, it doesn't come from them. It comes from someone else. And they're looking at what the body of research means. Okay? Does that make sense? All right, so let's look at some examples. Let's recap this. Yeah. Okay, so I went on to Google Scholar, and I did some quick research on the topic of e-learning, and I found one study that I would call original, and another study that I will call literature review. So we're going to look at what this looks like in an actual paper. So you could pull this up yourself. The first paper, it's called Move to Smart Learning Environment, Exploratory Research of Challenges in Computer Laboratory and Design Intelligent Virtual Laboratory for E-Learning Technology. Really rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? We have several authors, explains where they're from. This was published a couple years ago in Eurasia Journal of Mathematics, Science, and Technology Education. You can go to the DOI, which is kind of like a permanent website or a link to a source. So you can see that here. Yeah, you can see the mouse there. If you type that in, you should be able to find it. Okay, so let's look at how this paper is broken down. All right, from the very beginning, you can see the topic. The topics are usually very descriptive in research because they tell you exactly what they did and what the topic was. You see the authors, you see their kind of a little bit about them. All these authors, it appears that they're from Pakistan, though doesn't look like they're all from the same university, I don't think. It says when their paper was received by the publisher, when they made some changes, and then when it was accepted for publication, and then it was published during 2018. Following that, you're going to see a beautiful section called an abstract. Think of the abstract as a summary of the paper. This is awesome for you if you're looking at research. If what you're looking for doesn't show up in the abstract, just skip it. Go on to the next paper because you don't need it, right? This, again, research is all about being efficient. You don't hide. It's not like writing a mystery to where you got to read till the end to find out what we really found. It's going to be in the abstract. It's going to kind of summarize what they found, summarize what they did, what they researched, what they investigated in one really big paragraph. This is maybe 200 words. And in that abstract, you, as someone who's looking at the research, you can look at it and you're like, hey, this is great for me. Or you can look at this and like, nope, moving on. You can see keywords. This might be a way that someone could find this. And then you get into the sections of the paper. All right, so when we looked at the kinds of things that we expect to find in this kind of paper, you're going to see it's going to have an introduction, literature review, research design, methodologies, findings, and it goes on from there. Okay, so as we look through it, we see an introduction. In this section, you're going to see a summary of the issue that they're looking at, which in this paper, let's look at the abstract real fast. The university's computer laboratory is currently one of the most challenging aspects when imparting practical tasks with regards to the educational technology enhancement. This study, okay, this is where they're going to say what they did. The study intends to observe, I should have rewritten that to be past tense. Sorry. The study intends to observe the issues confronted by students while performing tasks in the laboratory in different educational modes. Okay, so they're looking at a computer lab and how it affects students. The online survey is conducted, present tense. It's okay. I shouldn't be critical because English may not be their first language. All right. The online survey is conducted using quantitative and qualitative research instruments to evaluate the students' perspectives. So, quantitative and qualitative, we call that mixed methods. And they used a survey. This exploratory work, again, that's a reference to the design, has emphasized the practical issues such as an insufficient time constraint. So these are some of their findings. Time was an issue in the lab. Instruments, geographical needs, financial concerns, and unavailability of subject specialists to cater for relevant issues about a particular course. So having people available. The sample size was 161. And this just explaining how the study worked. Drawn from a stratified sampling method for analysis of 4 strata. This research addresses these problems in the laboratory with an aim to improve the students' practical skills as well as their investigation-based learning. Okay, this is what they were hoping to do. It is needed for practical-based courses through experimentation with the help of artificial intelligence paradigms. The design science methodology is adopted. It presents the conception of an intelligent virtual laboratory, IVL, based on pedagogical agent-based cognitive architecture, PACA. This IVL provides the level of excellence of laboratory needs by enhancing the ET, which students can efficiently perform practical tasks online at anywhere. The results showed that IVL has a significant model. This term is important in statistics, significant or not significant. Significant model for enhancing the learning to students and recommendations for further research implementation. Okay, so their data was sufficient that they thought they found something significant. All right, we'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, so from this, you could tell what kind of study they did. They surveyed 161 students. They're trying to figure out how effective this lab was. These different categories that they figured out, they're probably from the data, from the survey or from their interview. Okay, anyway, so your introduction, they're going to explain this topic. They have some research questions. This is what they're hoping to find. Research question 1, which you see here as RQ1. How can we evaluate that the existing services of computer laboratory work has enhanced students' learning in their practical courses for examining the students' issues faced while using computer laboratory evaluation in mode-wise education? How can pedagogy is like kind of like teaching strategies, like methods for teaching. Cognitive architecture be constructed by proposing a unified theory of mind. How can we enhance student engagement? That's important. Through e-laboratory and CLMS. I wonder what the C stands for. To be useful for practical distance learning courses. All right, so this isn't just a physical space. This is also an online element. They're trying to figure out how to do this effectively online. Okay, so then you get into the literature review. So this section of their paper is basically the research they did before they conducted their own experiment to justify their experiment. So we see this is 5 paragraphs long. Excuse me. Okay, then you get research design and methodology. This is the section of the paper where they explained what design style they used and how they went about doing it. We kind of talked about that a bit. Okay, they used a questionnaire. Then they start talking about what the data says. This is when you start seeing some statistics. In here, you can look at the appendix if you want to see more. They have some different charts which kind of summarize things. It's color-coded. And then they go through and they explain what different things mean. Q, this references specific questions that they use to collect. This looks like some quantitative stuff right here. You see question 22. This is breaking down the answers from that specific question. And then it goes through. If you're listening to this, this probably isn't very interesting. I'm sorry about that. But I am showing what the paper looks like. Okay, then we get a section that they call Challenges Allied with Designing and Developing an Intelligent Virtual Laboratory. So they're going to kind of explain what their findings were related to this specific topic. This is kind of a design mock-up. They're showing how different concepts relate to each other. And that's even more complicated. Okay, going back and explaining a bit more about IVL, intelligent. What does IVL stand for? Each paper, they're going to have their own abbreviations. They're not just a standard list that everyone knows. So the first time a name shows up in a paper, to avoid repeating it 100 times, they just put it down to initials. So you got to pay attention the first time it shows up. Yeah. Okay, so they go through, they explain all their data. They have a lot of charts in this, which, you know, if you were interested in setting up an online lab, this would be good to look at. Okay, then they address how each of their questions was answered. So they have a section that they call Answer to RQs. They state the question, they state what they found, they state the question, state what they found for their 3 questions, and then they go to conclusions and future work. So again, if we look back, here where they kind of discuss what they found. That's what I'm calling a discussion section. And then their conclusions, what they thought. And then this is what they think should happen next. Excuse me. They acknowledge, and then they give references. And they got a lot of sources here. This would include, their the sources that predominantly showed up in their literature review or anywhere else in the paper. And then you can see their appendices. This is where you can see the specific questions that were asked. You have a Google Doc you can open up, and kind of what their findings were as they broke things down and coded it. This is going to be something you'll see in qualitative studies, where they look at how different topics kind of show up, and then they draw information from that. Anyway, okay, so this is one kind of study you might find. All right, let's look at the other kind. Okay, so this is a literature review. And it's nice that the title makes it really clear. A literature review of the factors influencing e-learning and blended learning in relation to learning outcomes, student satisfaction, and engagement. These authors, I am going to butcher these names if I tried. My ancestors are from Denmark, but it doesn't mean I can say it. And Mette Nortvig, on Christine Pettersen, and Soren Hattensen, I don't know how to do the L, Ballet, from University College Absalon in Denmark. Has their email addresses, their abstract. So they looked at a bunch of sources. Let's break this down. In higher education, e-learning is gaining more and more impact, especially in the format of blended learning. Blended learning is a mixture of technology and more traditional methods. Blended. Several studies have compared face-to-face teaching to online learning and or blended learning in order to try to define which of the formats provides the highest learning outcome, creates the most satisfied students, or has the highest rate of course completion. So they said there's some studies have looked at 3 specific things. However, these studies often show that teaching and learning are influenced by more than teaching format alone. Many factors play significant roles, and this literature review will look further into some of them. So we're kind of getting a head start on what they're going to look at. Okay, so they start with an introduction, where they're going to summarize kind of what we just read. They're going to explain their methodology, which is basically how they chose the studies they were going to look at. Let's see, 135 articles. 93 were selected as relevant for their criteria. They broke it down into 13 categories. 13 was reduced down to 5. They looked at a total of 44 articles. And then these are the categories. Okay, and then they break it down by date. This was published, I think, 2019. Anyway, they say kind of the years that some of these were from. Then it has different sections. Like if we look here, you're going to see different topics that they organize their information by as they present it back to us so that it makes sense. So comparison studies of online blended and F2F means face-to-face formats. So here's a section on those studies that they found. Then they have a section called Spaces, Learning Community and Student Identity. And then they have sources. Each of these parentheses here, they're different sources that they're summarizing and synthesizing. Then they have another section called Course Design, which is sources on course design, how classes were set up online. And Educator Roles and Relations. They said there were 5, conclusion and discussion. Okay, so this is where they talk about what they think all that information means. So if you're trying to go quickly through a source and you're looking at a literature review, you might just skip to the end, because that's where they summarize everything, right? And then you can back up and use other stuff too. Then here are all the sources that they looked at, which should be like 40 something plus. And there you go. So can you kind of see how these are a little bit different from each other? You had one that conducted original research. They explained what the study was, and so they have to spend a lot of the paper explaining their process and then what they found. And then you have the other one that's like, all right, we just looked at 40-something papers on a certain topic, and this is what we found. They're different kind of studies. They're going to read different. This is also not necessarily them just giving their opinions. It's not an essay. They're still presenting an analysis from information that was collected. Okay, so let's recap. If you are having to conduct your own research, probably something along the lines of more like a literature review paper, where your teacher's like, all right, go find a bunch of sources and write a paper. You're doing a literature review, right? They may not expect you to have a section at the beginning that says, okay, so this is how I found my sources, this is what I looked for. But an academic, they would show that. They would explain that. Probably what your teacher expects you to do is find a bunch of sources, maybe they tell you how many to find, and then explain what they say. So your job is to synthesize and bring things together. If any of this was new, you're probably not conducting original research, because that requires a lot more explanation than what one YouTube video can explain, right? When I was working on my dissertation, I took a class on qualitative methods, and I went through a very big, long process of getting my dissertation study approved before I could actually conduct it. I had to get training, excuse me, to make sure I was treating people ethically, and like it's a long process. It's not something you just run out and do. But looking at information and compiling it together, that's really easy, and that doesn't require approval. So probably the kind of paper you're asked to do is that second kind. You're writing a literature review, where you have to look at what all the data says and learn something new and present that in a paper. Does that make sense? Can you kind of see how what you're looking at and what you're having to write, how they line up with each other? Okay, so your teachers may or may not expect you to use section titles like this: Introduction, Research Design and Methodology. They may just skip that, and they just want you to have a beginning, which is your introduction, some sort of middle, where you explain all the topics and you present what it says on it, and then you have some sort of conclusion. So it's going to be confusing, because that's going to look like an essay. But if you're being authentic and you're following the process that a professional, an academic would do, you're not trying to prove a point. You're going to say what you found instead of what you want the reader to take away. Does that make sense? It's not the same process. But what your teacher may be calling a research paper may actually just be an essay that you use research for. So make sure you understand what they're asking you to do so that you can do that thing, instead of trying to do something that they're not asking you to do. I get questions in my YouTube channel all the time where there's a term that's been used, and unfortunately, I can use a term like reader response essay. This is a recent question. Reader response essay, is that the same as a response essay? It depends on how your teacher's using it, right? Because what I mean by it and your teacher may mean by it may be two different things, and there's not just one answer. Even if we do mean the same thing, your teacher may expect a different kind of paper than I would assign. So your clarity ultimately probably needs to come from the teacher. Whatever he is asking you to do, make sure you understand that. When you get past the point that you are doing research for an assignment, then you'll probably understand a little bit better. A lot of these terms are kind of vague, and there's not just one term, which is why there's not just one kind of structure that you might see. We can look at original research, and they may have different things, but they're going to follow a similar structure, just like a literature review paper might as well. I hope this was helpful. We really got into the weeds on this. We're about 45 minutes into this video. I hope that this was helpful for you. I did not really simplify everything. So this may take another explanation, another watch to get it all. But this is this is some meat that we are chewing on today. This is some thick stuff. But if you're in the thick of some sort of research project, you are collecting information, you have to write a paper, this can really help you out. For my students, I hope that this helps you out as well, that there's different structures, and I hope that this kind of explains it for you as well. So wherever you come from, whatever your purpose was, thank you so much for watching. If you actually made it to the end of this, you are amazing. Thank you. I hope that this helped explain, simplify things for you. You can, if you have questions, you can ask me in the comments below this video. You can email me directly at jacob@readwritecite.com. You can check out our website, readwritecite.com, to see other videos on this topic, or just subscribe. See what else is going to show up on this video. Right now I'm focusing on some research videos because that's what I'm teaching at the moment. And yeah, hopefully this is helpful for you. I'm trying to do some live streams, so if I can get my internet speed up fast enough, yeah, we're going to do some more of that. But we'll see. We'll see how long that goes. I'm glad to answer your questions. I can't edit your papers or do any of that for you, but I'm glad to answer short questions. But ultimately, the best answers are probably going to come from your teachers themselves, because they're the ones with the assignment. So good luck out there. Good luck writing. I hope the best for all of you, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.